You have a powerful story, and I really want to get into that because I believe that when we understand someone's story, it gives us a framework to understand your life view and how God got you from where you were to where you are today. Because it's easy to see the success now, and some people think that, oh, it was overnight success. No, there was a process that took place. So if you could take us back and just share your story.
So I believe as a kid, God took a hold of me at a very, very, very young age. As a matter of fact, I was 9 years old when I would make the prayer to receive Jesus at a Baptist church. And years would pass, and I would start going to high school. And I am grateful because God took a hold of me through worship. Since very young, I was 9, 10 years old. I started playing the drums. So I would have to be at church at all services. And there was a certain level of conduct that I had to have in order to be able to participate in the worship team, which also helped me to just maintain myself aligned with the word of God and prayer and my seeking of God. And so as years would pass, I would start going to high school, and yeah, that's when it gets a little bit more interesting and a little bit more challenging. And I was trying to fit in, but to a certain extent, I really couldn't. And it got to the point where I made a bad decision with good intentions, and I decided to start cutting school so that I can quote unquote honor God. And well, long story short, eventually that caught on to me, and I was going to school for many, many hours. Monday through Friday, I was going from 8 a.m. to 9 p.m. And then Saturdays, I was there from 8 a.m. to about 2 p.m., which led me to persuade my parents to purchase me a vehicle. I said, you know what, I'm trying to do what you guys want me to do, get a high school diploma, get in within the time frame, right? The only way I can actually do that, and based on my schedule, is if I drive to school. And I was 17 years old at the time, and for some reason, I was able to pull that off. And I started driving when I was 17.
Wow.
And what's interesting about that is that I was driving without a driver's license.
That could be a problem.
And yes, definitely that would become an issue. And the day of my 18th birthday back in 2008, on the day of my birthday, I will wake up, and I would decide to go get a haircut. And I was excited. I was motivated because I was asked to share a scripture at a small gathering at our church. So, when you're asked to share something, it's like you're more intentional in seeking God, in prayer, and even in your worship, right? And I remember that day I was preparing myself, not just to celebrate my birthday, but also to be able to share a word at our church. And I go to my typical barbershop, I get my hair cut, and I go back into my car. And again, I was driving this vehicle without a driver's license number. So I get in this vehicle, and now I start heading home. And I put my worship on, and I'm about maybe 2-3 blocks away from my barbershop when suddenly, unexpectedly, I hear this loud noise, this boom. And Chris, it was so loud that to the point where I thought I was involved in a vehicle collision. To my surprise, and it was not a vehicle collision. That loud noise that had just it sounded like something really, really hard struck my vehicle. That was actually, unfortunately, the head of a young lady. So immediately, I thought I was living a nightmare. I started panicking, right? Anxiety is at its peak. And I remember in the midst of all of this, I started exploring my options. And I say, should I stay and face my consequences? Or should I try kicking this windshield off of me? Because it was cracked, right? So I was not going to be able to drive. And should I try fleeing, the scene? And I'm grateful to God because in the midst of my pain and my fear, he gave me the courage to be able to stay and face my consequences. And so I would go on and park this vehicle, and I will exit, and immediately I'll start walking towards where this young lady was at. It was near a fire hydrant. And I would look at this young lady. She's laying down on the floor and she's bleeding and she's shaking. And man, I was driving that vehicle. I'm responsible for what she's going through. A few minutes later, a police vehicle will show up to the scene. At this point, I'm shaking. I'm crying, right? There's a bunch of people on the streets, right? All the spotlight is on me. And this officer gets out and she yells, and with this tone, this heavy approach, she asked and she said, "Who was driving this vehicle?" And I will go on and say, "Ma'am, that was me." And she will throw me against the police car. She'll start handcuffing me, and with fear, anxiety, and pain, I would ask her, "Ma'am, what's gonna happen to me?" And she would use a phrase that years later I would have to go through like a trauma kind of healing process. She would say, "Kid, you're gonna go to jail for murder."
Mm.
So imagine, I'm an 18-year-old.
Yeah.
The day of my birthday. I know my condition. I do not have a driver's license. And somebody who is at a point where they kind of know what happens when an incident as such occurs, she pretty much tells me, your life is over. You're going to jail for murder. And I'll be in this vehicle, the police vehicle, handcuffed in the back seat for about 4 hours and a half. And I remember looking towards my left, and I see this Asian kind of old lady with white hair, yellow shirt, beige shorts, with her hands lifted high. And I dare to believe this lady was not praying for me. She was actually interceding for me. This lady was crying, and many times she will yell and she will say, "That boy is innocent. That boy is innocent." She'll point. And yes, that was encouraging, right? I believe God sends angels,
Yes.
To intercede on our behalf, right?
100%.
But although that was a clear picture of God being there with me in the darkest moment of my life, unfortunately, I was not able to see beyond my current circumstance. I started doubting. I started having long conversations with God. I'm like, why would you allow this? Since a kid, you took a hold of me. I've always worshiped you. I've always been at church. I was the one who was there picking up the chairs, who was waiting to mop, sweep, whatever it took, so that your house could be well taken care of and our service could be at as best as it could be. Why would you allow this dark moment? And I started complaining, right? But eventually, as I would see my mother come to the scene, my sister come to the scene, and my loved ones be there, I would eventually come to terms with myself. And I would say, "You know what, Jeremy? At the end of the day, if you go to jail, you'll probably be mad at God for 1 or 2 days. But because of the whole circumstance and everything that you're about to experience in prison or jail, you're bound to go back to chapel or whatever it is, right? Yeah. So you know what? I'd rather just give in now." And I said, "God, as I'm looking at my loved ones, I said, God, I don't know what I'm gonna go through in there, but one thing I ask you, just give them peace, and I promise you, I'll go in there and serve you." And I said, "But if you give me the opportunity, God, if you give me the opportunity to be set free from this situation, from this police vehicle, from these handcuffs, I promise you, I'll go out there and do something significant for your kingdom."
Wow, that's powerful. You made a covenant.
So yeah, little did I know I was making a covenant, right? And a few, maybe 20, 30 minutes later, a detective will knock on my windshield, and he would say, Jeremy, as far as today, you're gonna be set free. We found a driver's license number registered to your name. Now, this does not mean you're not going to have to go to courts. You're not going to have to face judges. You're not going to have to hire an attorney or whatnot, right? But as far as today, you'll be set free. And I remember exiting this police car, hugging this Asian lady who I will never see again. And in the midst of the crowd, there was somebody who was my cousin. And right after all of this happened, and I was able to get words of encouragement and just hugs from my loved ones, this man will take me to lunch. And I don't know if he felt sorry for me, or I don't know what. The only thing I know is that God was working in the midst of all this situation. God took my covenant seriously. And what he was doing is he was preparing the resource so that I would be able to fulfill that covenant. And that day, I would be introduced through my cousin that showed up to the scene to the scrap metal industry. And that's what I do today. Yes.
And going back to that situation, do you know what happened that allowed you to get free from that and not have to, pay the price for what happened?
Well, number one, I believe it was God's mercy.
Yeah.
One of the things that I forgot to mention is that this young lady, unfortunately, would pass away, right? And I definitely believe it was the grace of God and His mercy upon my life. But also, I remember back in the when I was in my early 17s, I would go and take a test, right, to try to get my permit. I never passed, but I believe that's where I was able to get a driver's license number to my name, right? And which they would use in my favor, right? But again, I credit God to this miracle, because if her family would have decided to pursue charges, I'm sure something definitely could have happened.